Okay, I'd like to commence with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation, from whose lands this event is being broadcast today, and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands where you are joining us from today, and and further acknowledge the owners of this land as the original storytellers. Feel free to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box if you would like to do so. Chiara Priorelli now is the head of publishing and acquisitions at Wavesound, Australia's leading independent audiobook publisher and audio partner to key publishers like Allen and Unwin, Affirm Press, and Ultimo Press, and the home to some of Australia's biggest authors, including Chris Hammer, Christian White, Helen Garner, and Gary Disher. Chiara has previously worked at HarperCollins Publishers and Allison and Busby in the UK before heading up the Wavesound imprint championing ANZ authors. The list covers all genres in fiction and non-fiction with a focus on adult titles, but also top caliber children's and YA titles as well. Her role covers the selecting and acquiring audio rights to produce the best local titles in audio, the creative production, including casting narrators, and the relationships with key retail and library distributors. So I cannot imagine anyone better to introduce us to the world of audiobooks than Chiara. So, Chiara, welcome to First Friday. I'll just get you to unmute yourself, which I haven't done. Okay.
Yep.
Oh, there we
Hello.
go.
Hi.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. So we like to start with the basic sort of question, like, how did you get here? So, Chiara, how did you get here?
My background was always book print publishing, and then I worked for many, many years in London. And then when I moved to Australia, it was all anew, and I was very lucky to, through some connections with my previous boss at Allison and Busby, who was talking to my now boss in the UK, who said we are looking to open up an arm in Australia to launch and support Australian authors, Australian and New Zealand authors in Australia. And my previous boss knew I was here, knew I was passionate about books, and said, have a chat to Chiara, and here I am. So a good 11 years on from there, we've gone from 3 books a month to 17 books a month, and it's been quite a ride.
Quite a ride. What about first getting into publishing? What drew you to publishing?
I think it was, I've always enjoyed reading. I don't know if, I think most writers can probably pinpoint the book that sort of made them fall in love with reading. And mine was, I think I was age 9 and I was reading Watership Down. And I can picture myself on the armchair reading the book and being in a state of, when I finished it, I was distraught, and I just thought this is amazing what books can do. So I think from a very young age, I always knew I had a love for books, love for writing, and first job, I just knew I wanted to do something in publishing, and I was very lucky to land the role at HarperCollins. But I started in publicity, then at Allison and Busby, which was a smaller publisher, was sort of working across the whole range of things from website design to cover design to acquiring. So that I think that experience really helped with this role, which really does cover such a breadth of different skills. Yeah.
In it. Yes. Okay, so let's get into audiobooks as an item in themselves. I think most of the people that are listening to us today will have some understanding of the publishing industry. You're acquired, you go through an editing process, there's manuscript that goes back and forth and back and forth. Can you just walk us through the production process from the moment you see a manuscript to when a finished audio file appears on the World Wide Web?
Sure. So we get manuscripts come through from publishers, from agents, and once we've obviously read the manuscript and decided this is one that we do want to produce in audio, and we've um, acquired it, and this usually involves offering an advance to a publisher for the audio rights, then at that point, we might have already a good sense of what type of voice that we would like to narrate the book. But we usually then we ask the author, we have sort of a form that sort of promotes their, helps them. It's almost like a questionnaire where we will ask for the author's input. So we definitely think, there are audio publishers out there where they acquire audio rights and they just do it and the author doesn't really have a say. But we like to involve the author, get their input, what's their vision for the book, and then using that and then our expertise, knowing who are narrators that have particular skills, will brief the studio. The studio will either seek out particular narrators that we already have in mind, or they will cast the net wide and will receive auditions from various narrators that sort of fit our brief. And then we listen to a sample read from the book. And then we'll pick usually our front runner or one or two, and we'll present that to the author for their approval. And then hopefully the author will go, I love it. And that's the narrator that we go with. And of course, if the book requires two narrators, then, we'll commission, we'll get two narrators on it. It could be a multicast one. So it all depends on what the book needs.
Right. When does that decision get made, whether you're going to go dual or multi?
So I would say 95, percent of the time it's a straight narration. And we need to define sort of when we talk multi-narration, there's a book which is told from the perspective of three characters and it's told in first person. Therefore, you definitely want to have three separate voices because you are in that character's voice. So in that case, you're getting three narrators to read the book and read the chapters that are told in the voice of that particular character. And that's still considered a straight narration. It just means that there's three narrators on the book. Where what's now coming more into play is that sort of duet, they call it. So duet narration, where every single character in dialogue is played by a separate narrator, and that's more like a script. It's not straight narration. So to be clear, in a standard title, which would have one narrator, that narrator would be playing all the different parts. So female, male, say you go with a female narrator, they'd also be playing the male part. And that is standard, and that is why audio narration is a particular skill, because you need somebody who can move between very different voices or can do character voices quite subtly, but you hear the change in tone. So that is definitely the standard, and that's what many audio listeners prefer. And then there's the duet narration, which is more like a reenactment, where you have all the dialogue played like a radio, almost like a radio drama. But that is it's less usual, and it's usually for a particular kind of book, or if it's written in a script form. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We do have, I just want to stick on this narration for a little while. We have a couple of questions coming in. One from Jessica. What about if an author wants to narrate their own work?
So this is the question that comes up all the time. So there are reasons why it would make sense, and there are reasons why it wouldn't make sense. So it's very natural for an author to assume that they would be the best person to narrate their book because they have written it. And so in their minds, they're the ones who know, how they envisioned the the book to be narrated. They know, they in their heads, they're like, I know what my character sounds like, etc. But um, audio narration is such an incredible and very particular skill. We have A-list actors who don't know how to narrate an audiobook. And part of it is that knowing how to narrate. I think it's sometimes very easy if you tried to sort of read your own manuscript. And what you're hearing in your head isn't necessarily what's coming out sort of verbally.
Right.
So we would always, particularly for fiction, we would always advise against the author reading their own work unless they happen to be extremely skilled at it. Perhaps they have an acting background or broadcasting background, and they just have the right skills to do it. But more often than not, a professional narrator will just be able to bring that nuance and that sort of the energy and the pacing and be able to handle the dialogue and accents in a way that the sort of more layman sort of author might not be able to. I think the exceptions would be memoirs where, and again, not there's a preconception that if it's a memoir, the author absolutely should read. But again, it's all about the listening experience. When you think of people who are listening to audio, the vast majority, and even the new research that came out just a couple of days ago shows that sort of over 90% of the vast majority of people do listen to audio whilst they're multitasking. So whilst they're doing something else. So they're not really listening to it, fully concentrated. So you need someone who's really going to be incredibly engaging. So if somebody's written a memoir, but they're not a known voice, then again, one would probably steer towards a professional narrator. When it's a celebrity where people recognize the voice and they sort of they want to hear that person's voice on the audio, that's where, if they have a profile, if people would be disappointed that it's not the voice that they know so well, that is when we would
Comes
most
obvious.
likely. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
One of the first audiobooks I ever listened to was Nicholas Nickleby by Dickens.
Mm-hmm.
That was read by a single narrator. Every voice had a different accent, different pitch, different tone. I don't know how this person kept their sanity by the end of it. It was such a tour de force, and
Yeah.
I loved it. I
Yeah.
didn't need anything else, but it was a very particular skill, and I don't imagine that every actor could even do that, as you've said.
No,
What
exactly.
about, yeah, go.
No,
What is
I
your
was just
typical
going to
time
say
frame? Sorry, you go on. You go
no,
on.
no, I
Yeah.
was I was going to say exactly that. In fact, the first audiobook that I went into the studio to watch and record was Solari Gentile's, the first book in Solari Gentile's Roland Sinclair series, narrated by Rupert Degas, who's known in the industry for being the man of all voices. And he had to do a scene with 8 different characters, female and male, all with this very quick fire banter. And he just sat there, just moving from one to the other, and it gave me goosebumps. I just like okay, I'm in awe, like truly in awe. So it is quite incredible.
Well, I'm going to ask the question that can't be answered, like how long is a piece of string? What's your typical time from getting a manuscript or getting the rights to the
Mhm.
manuscript and
Yep.
being told, yes, you are to do the audiobook, to the audiobook being available?
We would like to have 6 months, but we're looking at 4 months. From the point that we've acquired it, we can work at sort of that sort of 4 month mark. And in Australia, that tends to be sort of timelines are sort of between the 6 and 4 months. The longer we have, the better, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, and in terms of production, again, Australia works with quite tight deadlines and have the final manuscript and have 2 months to get it out. And recording might take 1 month, between start to finish.
with it. How long does it take for the actual audio to be recorded? So if you're looking at a typical book of 80, 90,000 words,
Yeah, so that would probably we don't tend to record we our sessions are probably 4 hour sessions because it's a very tiring process. So average book would take a week to record. It usually takes between 1.5 to double the amount of time in studio as the final. So a 9 hour audio book, which would be quite standard, would take you would factor in 18 hours of studio time to record it. And then with obviously the editing that goes on top of that. But the
right?
actual narration bit would be sort of double. Yeah.
In the studio, what sort of preparation does the narrator have to do?
So we expect them to have read the book. So they're very familiar with the text and
So
the
they're not first
characters.
time
No,
seeing it.
no, no. Um, and that, that's important to us. It's important to them. With particular there are tricky titles with a lot of language or pronunciation issues. Those, we obviously flag that as needing some extra prep. And then we often we have time before they come into studio where the pronunciations have been checked. It could be with the author or, other means. And then there's certain things that might come up even in the proofread that people might want to sort of triple check that everything's right. But yeah, there's a lot of pre-prep before you get the narrator in studio.
Can get to it. And what would the typical session be? Would it be like 1 hour, half an hour?
It's 4 hours.
Yep.
For that would be between 3 and 4 hours, but it also depends on the narrator. There's some who are they just have incredible stamina. They can do a little bit longer. If it's an author read, sometimes it can just be 2 hours, and then you start hearing a little bit of lag in the voice. They start making too many mistakes, so you call it a day. So it really depends on who's the reader. We've just been working on one where it's just taken far, far longer than your standard because there is a lot of language. It's quite complex text, and the narrator is sort of a slower, reader. So it's very variable.
Do you insist on absolute fidelity to the written text? If they miss a preposition here and there, do
It
you go back?
Not if it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. So we do pick up on anything that obviously doesn't make sense. That's an
Yeah.
error. But those minor details we wouldn't break up the flow.
Yeah. And you said about, people making mistakes once they get towards the end of their ability, their
Mhm.
time. Is Are there any tools that you use that to start to measure that, like, words per minute, or is that just your own
No, I
sense of
think
it?
that's the producer's instincts. They can just see it's flagging, and often it's the narrator themselves who just can feel it. They're just like, no, let's call it a day, and
Yeah.
which is why we don't. Where we have our timelines, but if things do get delayed, then we push the release dates. So it is a little bit of a more movable feast, I would say, than print.
Yeah. So you'll have a producer in the studio the whole time?
Yes, yes. So we do, if it's a studio read, we do have some narrators that are the really experienced ones, which really don't need to be produced. And they might record, they have their own home setup, but we always have an editor then who will look at the files and a proofreader. So there always is it's never just the narrator on their own.
Right. Yeah. What if a narrator falls ill or something happens to them? What have you had that experience?
Oh, many times. And
Yeah.
during COVID, that was, just happened constantly. And
You
we
brought up the
wait.
thing that should not be named. But anyway, yes.
Um, we wait. We've got to wait until they're better. So we wouldn't, yeah, we wouldn't change narrator mid-book. That would be That would be crazy. So there are so many instances where unforeseen circumstances, and it could be they're just their voice is gone, and so you got to wait a couple of days. So yeah, these are all fun things that can happen within your well-planned schedule.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that sort of basic understanding of what it is and how it gets made.
Yeah.
I want to now move on to the Australian context.
Yeah.
How strong is our local market at the moment for locally produced audiobooks?
I would say it is very strong in the sense that there's a lot being produced in audio now within Australia, which is great to see. So as I said, 10 years ago, we were there was only one other player who was producing Australian content. And, that meant sort of the top tier was sort of getting produced and not much of sort of the newer names coming out. And so when we launched our imprint, it was amazing. We were just getting incredible content. And as, you mentioned in the bio, we launched Jane Harper and Chris Hammer and Christian White in audio, which would have been writers which may might not have been, published in audio at that time. So it was great to have this, incredible talent and the ability to sort of publish them. And now the market has grown. A lot of publishers are also the big sort of five are producing their audio either in-house or working in conjunction with us. So certainly the content, the amount of audiobooks that are being produced within the Australian market has, I would say, more than trebled, if not quadrupled. So, and the appetite for audio has, of course, increased exponentially, and there are more, platforms that are now Audible. Library, there was a library market, and then Audible launched here, and that was sort of the main market for audio. But now you've got Spotify and Apple Books and Google Play. So the accessibility of audio has truly increased. And so it's very exciting, and it is definitely growing. That said, the ANZ market is still a small market comparative, and it's still a young audio market comparative to the rest of the world. So, when I look at a title which may have a global audience, the difference naturally in sales between one where we might only have ANZ rights with if we had world rights is, it's quite substantial.
Who's providing this appetite? Who are you feeding?
Oh, just the book
Does it differ?
buyers.
Sorry, does it
Yes.
differ from readers?
Yes. So I would say there are readers who are turning to audio. And I say that it's not like they're giving up books to now just listen to them in audio, but I think they're just consuming more. I think our lives are increasingly getting busier and busier and busier. And, what you hear is people who love reading books, but they just don't have time. And audio has allowed them, because it's something that you can do whilst you're commuting or driving or going to the gym or running or taking your dog for a walk. It has given them the opportunity to actually read or listen to more books than they would have been able to if they were limited to the print. So our market is definitely readers. But then there is the other element, which are people who wouldn't normally be an avid book reader, who have come to audio because they might listen to podcasts. That's definitely been we've seen that shift of people who've been introduced to audio through the podcast market. There's a contingent of the male market who are less less of the avid readers. I mean, women are still sort of the bigger portion of readers. Whereas you do get a lot of men who are listening to audio rather than reading a book. So I think what's wonderful about audio is that I think it's expanding the market for people to experience books, whichever, however whether it's reading, whether it's listening, whether it's on a Kindle, it's definitely opening things up.
Does that impact the marketing of that audiobook since you're reaching to different audiences than what, say, your typical book distributor bookshop might be reaching?
Yeah, I think for us, certainly there is our marketing tends uh, B2B. So essentially, we work together with the with the retailers. So it's all about how, with so many audiobooks that obviously are being produced, uh, how do we get a consumer to pick that audiobook? And of course, audio, there is the issue of discoverability because unlike you can't walk into a bookstore and and suddenly see the beautiful book on the table and pick it up because you see the lovely cover. Nobody's trolling Spotify or Audible, just sort of looking at things. I mean, yes, but in less so. Most people come to platforms either knowing what they want or because Audible is, sending them, read this or look at that. So our marketing is basically looking to make our titles very visible on those sites. Um, and we work together with the print publishers who their marketing is still much more consumer led. But now it's sort of if you see publicity or media, in the paper talking about a book, everyone knows that most likely that book will be in all formats. So they would know, they know about it that way. The media doesn't really talk about an audiobook. It'll talk about the title and then the formats or audiobooks in general. But media still always focuses on the print,
Yeah.
really.
You mentioned in your streaming services like Audible and Spotify and Google. Um, what impact do they have on the Australian market in terms of what is produced and how it's produced?
That I think that would be like saying I don't know, what would Dimmicks, does Dimmicks influence what gets produced sort of in print? Really, they don't. What we choose to acquire and what we choose to produce in audio is what the publishers and literary agents or what we're seeing trending in the self-published space. And I would say the only aspect perhaps which does impact is children's, sort of less children's titles probably get produced in audio as in in terms of sales, adult fiction or adult nonfiction will tend to, obviously there are exceptions, but will, in general, as a general rule, will tend to sell more than a children's title. And that's purely because um, when you think about how audio is consumed, a child isn't commuting and a child isn't going to the gym and a child, isn't cooking and necessarily taking their dog for a walk. And there are a few people who literally plug into audio and just sit on their couch and listen. So, and therefore, as a consequence of that, the retailers probably don't promote children's titles as much as fiercely as they would an adult title. So that is a consideration that we know, okay, this is a children's title, it's probably not going to get as much, it's probably not going to get showcased as much on the retail side. But that's all part of it would be the same as somebody a publisher deciding to pick a book knowing that maybe this would be one that would do really well in Big W and Kmart. So it's a consideration, but it's not a reason why you would choose to publish a title. It's certainly a consideration.
Okay. So their impact on what is produced is relatively small, which means
Yes.
that we can, I suppose, as a country or as an industry, chart our own course somewhat in
Yes.
what we
Yes.
produce and what we do. So
Yeah.
how important is it that an Australian book has an Australian narrator?
Personally, I think very, very important. If something is set in Australia and you had uh, an American accent on it, I can't think of anything more dire, quite frankly. It's all about, equally if we have an Australian author who's written a book which is set in the UK or in Scotland, we're going to have a Scottish narrator on it. So it's all about staying true. I think that's the beauty of audio, is that you want to be and immersed in the experience. And in fact, funny enough, I remember somebody asked me going, oh, because I love reading books on the page, but I also love listening to audio. And we published Tim Winton's The Shepherd's Hut, and we had Kate Mulvaney narrate. And as a non-Australian at the time, he was sort of newer, and listening to Kate narrate his writing and just the vernacular, and she's from the same area, Geraldton, as Tim, um, and I got so much more from it because I was listening to her, and whereas even if I'd read it on the page in my head, not being an Australian, I don't think it wouldn't have had the same effect. So I think it's incredibly important. I think one has to, if you're writing a book set in Australia, then you lean into it, and that's what you want to hear, right? That's the authenticity about it. I think that's really what people want,
Is there
authentic.
is there any burden then, or is there any obstacle then on the international market where people may not be used to the Australian accent? Like apocryphally, I think the original Mad Max, we were always told, had to be redubbed to be shown to
Mhm.
an American audience. I'm assuming
Yeah,
that's still not the case, but does having like broad Australian accents limit sales internationally?
I think it's more um, the book itself. If you're going to write an Australian book, that in itself potentially, I mean, one could take the view that that is in a way limiting your market, um, because somebody in the States might not, can't relate to it, or what is it that's going to make them want to read it that's set in a book is a great book. And if somebody wants to read something which is set in Australia, then they're going to want to listen to it with an Australian accent. If that's not going to be, I don't believe that that's going to be what's stopping somebody um, from reading, from listening to that book. I mean, if there are titles which are, say, nonfiction titles, or something where it doesn't have to be an Australian voice, and the topic, and this could be more in nonfiction, and the topic is a very broad and globally relevant topic, that is where we could would probably lean towards a British voice, because that's seems to be the sort of considered the most neutral of accents. So that sort of Australians quite like the British voice, the Brits definitely like the British voice, and Americans love the British voice. So you're sort of covering all bases. So there are some titles where accent doesn't matter, and we would choose to have, we would go for sort of a neutral British voice. I feel people tend to want to sort of, it's the US is the breakout market, and you want to tailor to the American accent. But I find, and this is being half American myself, but that the American accent to others can also be, so it's it's about what makes sense.
Yeah, so that comes. Are there any Australian narrators who make a full-time living from narration?
I think that's a good question. I think most narrators do voiceover work, so it could be advertising, but most have got do stage or TV. I'd say I don't think they would do it full time just from audiobooks. It would be voiceover work. Some, yes, are just voiceover. It's still, yeah, we have, you know, budgets aren't extensive. This is publishing, you know.
Oh, look, but at least it's a growing publisher. And you said that, you've gone from producing 3 to 17 books in a month. So it's
Yeah,
growing.
yeah.
Where do you think it's going to reach its peak?
I think at the moment, I think I wouldn't say it's peaking, but I think now what we're finding is, and I think this is across the board, it is a difficult market because there's so much being produced. So whereas the top tier titles are the sort of previously one would say with less titles being on the market, mid, even low tier titles would fare quite well. Um, Now, top tier titles are doing far better than they ever could have previously because the market has grown, but it's the mid tier to lower tier which can actually struggle because now there's just so much out there. People, we're a bit like sheep. You go for people just go for what they hear about and what is, what a lot of noise for. So this idea that because audio, everyone's hearing, audio is booming and it is a growth market, and it is, and it's incredibly exciting. But that's not to say that you a book which is produced in audio, the audio is just gonna sell in the thousands and thousands and thousands. It's still a fraction, still is a fraction of the print for some cases, and then in other cases it can actually do better than the print. But it is, yeah, one has to see it in the context, that it is still it's a hard, it is a hard market for every title to do incredibly well. But that's across the board.
Speaking of seeing it, when a publisher, say, comes to you with a manuscript, or can you immediately see whether this is going to be an audiobook that's going to be successful?
Um,
Or is it really tied to sometimes to its success in the print publishing world?
Yeah, I think it's definitely tied to it, and it's like if we know that this is a lead title, and it's this is their blockbuster crime thriller you know, for the Christmas period, we know that that's sort of a pretty safe bet that that's going to do well in audio. So it does tend to sort of match the print and follow sort of our bestsellers would probably um, mirror the what's you're seeing on the bestsellers list in print or in particularly as what's selling well in ebooks. That said, and then there are some titles which in sort of particular genres, it could be a self-published author that uh, is getting good traction um, in a specific sort of niche area, which could be, a action thriller, guns blazing, a title where it's very, testosterone heavy and it's just done really well in E, then suddenly that could do, incredibly well, and that might not be doing much, in print at all. So it can vary. Um, but I would say it's quite, things that we know wouldn't particularly do well in audio are very, very niche titles or literary, sort of highbrow literary, unless it's one that we think could win an award. But that's in the same case as, as in print, it's always the riskier. So you're looking at the most commercial with the broadest audience. Those are the ones that tend to do very well. And obviously anything that's tied to celebrity or, popular podcast, um, that's an obvious link there.
To come through. Yeah. We're coming towards, we've got about 20 minutes left. So if you do, to the members of the audience, if you've got questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll probably get to them in the next 5, 10 minutes. What I want to look at is one of the more recent developments, and you touched on it right at the beginning in the audiobook, is this is the full cast or the deluxe treatment
Hmm.
of works.
Yeah.
Um, how does that change how you might operate as a small publisher of books,
Mhm.
and how do you think it's going to impact the industry as a whole?
Well, the full, big dramatization. So this isn't something that we've at Wavesound, we haven't done any like this. RB Media, so we're part of RB Media. So Wavesound is part of the biggest audio publisher in the world. So our counterparts in at Recorded Books, we actually have an imprint which is dedicated, it's called Graphic Audio, and that is solely dedicated to doing these big dramatizations. But they're huge, they're major, major productions, obviously with huge production budgets, and they tend to be done for something like, Fourth Wing, which we publish, and we publish it as a standard narration, and it's been, an incredible, incredible success. And now there's the dramatized version. So it tends to be something which is in conjunction to a straight narration. So something that we've seen has worked really well. Then you have the dramatization, which for an audience who likes that sort of thing. And I think it's very much, there are listeners who don't want that. They want the book and they want the experience of the writing and they just want that storytelling. And it's more akin to reading the book on the page. And then you have another audience who really enjoys the dramatization of it. So it really depends on where you sit as a listener, really.
Well, look, no shade on any producer of audiobooks, but I think I'm in the first group. I've only listened to one and I couldn't get through it, to be honest, because it would say an owl, like on the page, it would say something like an owl hooted in the darkness. And then there'd be an owl hooting in background. And I'm thinking, you just told me that. I don't
Yeah.
need it twice.
Yeah.
So that brings me to another question. If you're doing a full drama or a full cast, do you actually have to edit the manuscript to start to move away from that? And does it start to become much more of an old-fashioned like radio play?
Yes, yes, is the answer. So I don't have, having not done one myself, I don't have a very sort of detailed sense of what goes into it, but it is definitely, it's another beast. It's nothing, it is a whole different way of working. And it is like a script, and how it's done. So very much, yes, definitely editing would be involved, adaptations for sure. So it's very different, very different.
Yeah. So we have that as an emerging trend. Do you see other trends? Like, what do you think the industry will look like in, 5 years' time?
Oh, that is such a good question, and it's been changing and growing so much, just even in the last sort of 2 years. Of course, AI is obviously the talk of the moment, and no doubt that is going to become more and more prevalent. Um, we are not in, certainly at Wavesound, we believe in human narration. But there will be a space for AI narrated books as technology gets better and better, because production costs are so, can, for particularly for some titles, can be prohibitive. So there is a space for that. And so it'll be interesting to see how how we navigate that. I mean, one of the research that just came out recently was that listeners are more ambivalent than one would think about AI narration, which um, so we'll see.
What were you were hoping that they'd be more militant?
Yeah, I guess there's something, and this is more on a personal level. One thinks, the creativity, that is what makes us human, right? So the nuances that a one actor can bring to a text that another one might bring. I mean, that's the beauty. We get auditions from three different actors playing a sample, reading a sample of a book, and three of them can be brilliant, but they bring something different to it. And it's just wonderful to have that
Do you see
that
this
nuance.
ambivalence across generations? I asked this that I've got a couple of kids who are still at university, and they're fiercely critical of AI.
Mhm.
and reject it. As soon as they see AI in the production of something, they're just like, I'm done. I'm not looking at it.
Right. Right. That's quite heartening. I think it really depends. I don't see it as generational because I see a lot of people who are sort of older or I think it's more about those who are in the arts and those who are more creatively inclined might be more against AI, and those who listeners who consume audio more for facts and nonfiction. They just want content. They're less bothered about that side of things. So I think there's, again, like all things, there's an audience for it and there's audience against it. And I think the important thing is the transparency about it. Um, is as long as people are aware that what they're listening to in AI and they're happy with that, then no problem. And it could actually help more books get produced, which otherwise wouldn't get produced in audio. So there is definitely positives to it. I think at the moment the technology isn't quite there, or to some degree, but say for accents or dialogue, character voices, AI is not quite there, but give it time, it may be.
Give
And
it
I'm,
that.
I'm sure at some point it will be, but
I don't know if that's heartening or disheartening
yeah.
advice in the end. Give it time and it will be. Um, Last question from me, and it's the one that we always ask. You said that you haven't been able to read a full novel in the last 10 years, but
Yes.
what are you trying to read now?
So at the moment I'm reading Dark Desert Road by Anna Downs. So she's the author of The Safe Place, which came out a while ago, and oh my gosh, the her second book, which we published, which was amazing. Red. Oh, I really should know this. I have to look this up because this is terrible that I'm forgetting this, but Red River Road, I think. Red River Road. She's got this new thriller set in an exclusive health resort where things aren't what it seems, and it's looking at the dark side of wealth and what are people prepared to do to have the best possible life. So that's proving to be a real page turner. And then I'm also reading a spicy romance novel, The Holiday Grump, which has been doing very well in as an ebook. Was a self-published author and now has been bought by Atlantic and Alan Unwin. So we're looking to do that. So yeah, these are two on my
You're reading.
current reading list.
Well, that's excellent. And that's a fabulous segue to some of our audience questions because someone did say, wants to know about self-published authors. How would a self-published author who still has the rights to their audio, so they haven't signed them across to anyone, both Daryl and Maliha have asked, do you accept submissions from
Yes,
self-published
absolutely.
authors? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the importance is, again, remembering that although we do publish quite a few audiobooks, we still have a limited list. So it's all about what we see. Is there enough potential for substantial sales given the cost that goes into the production of an audio? So we absolutely, and I'm very much interested in the self-published market at the moment, and I think certainly in the future. So as long as there are some, good sales figures, you know, that it's sort of pitched as, yeah, good sales figures that you're you're
Mhm.
you're getting good traction. We're very happy to hear from you directly. So
Do
I'm happy
those,
for you to,
yeah, do those
cast my
sales
interest.
figures, sorry, need to be recent? Because Clancy has sort of asked a related question. What if a book is out of print, but perhaps it did sell well when it was in print? Is that something like, can you give new life to an old book?
I think if there's still relevance, the issue is more, again, in that instance, if it's we do look at recent sales. So if we're picking up a backlist title, it could have been published, 20 years ago, but it's how it's still, if it's still tracking well now, it's
Right.
more likely that we would pick that up than something which has, you know, was published, was very successful 5 years ago, but not so much. So I'd say that's probably less viable, um, unless you do have, yeah, it would need some sort of revamp, or whether somebody a print publisher was going to do a reissue or something like that. So I'd say that is a bit of a riskier proposition.
Yeah. One sort of part of the publishing world that can be very niche is nonfiction. What are
Mhm.
you looking for if someone does either self-published or coming from a publishing arm? What are you looking for in nonfiction? And do you have to make different considerations and different production choices for nonfiction works?
Um, I think with nonfiction, what tends to be, unless it would have to have a very, it would either have to, in the self-published space, it's difficult, nonfiction, and even nonfiction, which is published by traditional publishing, the nonfiction that tends to work tends to be ones where the author does have some sort of profile, be it a media profile, something which why one has to think, why is the general public going to turn to your book as opposed to, say, if you've written a book on self-help or a finance book or whatever that might be, why are they going to choose yours instead of the one that's written by the celebrity who's always on daytime TV and everyone has heard of? I think that's what tends to move those sorts of books is the author profile. So that can be quite difficult. If it's, if you're writing on a broad topic, and if you're writing a niche topic, it just means your audience is smaller. So for audio, it's smaller again. So
Or
I'm
again,
painting I'm painting not a very positive picture. It's not to say we do very well with nonfiction, but it does tend to be in that media profile, celebrity profile, memoir of a known person space.
yeah, yeah. So does that account for sort of returning to the Australian market, a non-fiction book on a very particular Australian topic? So a place in Australian history.
I
How?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that those used to do better, and that was more where the library market was sort of driving, audio. Um, Now, for example, we've just done a wonderful book. Like we did the Australian Wars earlier this year, and we've just done a book called Blackbirding, also about the slave trade. So there are some really cultural, important books, but again, those are published by mainstream publishers. And those we do feel like those tick on, like ones which we know will be perennial sellers, where they just have, there might be groundbreaking, have a real cultural value, and will be books that people will turn to, as reference points. Um, so those which are very much, in the Australian, talking about Australian history can do very well. But if it's a neat, like that's, while that's a niche topic, it's actually a broad and very important topic, as opposed to just a historical, a book about, a specific battle from World War One that involved, something that's sort of more niche. I'd say that's harder. That's harder.
Yeah. And there's a whole range of things that are not, I suppose, traditional audiobooks that cover those ranges, such as the great courses of history series,
Mm.
where
Yeah. Yeah.
they're basically lectures,
Mm.
university lectures, often
Yeah.
with applause at the end of each one, which
Right.
I never applauded any of my lecturers. I don't know why they're so popular, but yeah. So it does make it difficult.
Yes.
We've had other questions come in about specifically children's books, which you've touched on a little bit, but I just wonder
Mhm.
if you could talk a little bit about what makes you bring on a children's work. Do you treat it differently? Like, does it have to have things like sound effects and music as a prerequisite almost?
Because it's all on what makes sense for the title. So we did so for example, we've published Little Lunch, the Little Lunch series, which we did as a collection. So again, that one difficulty sometimes with sort of children's books, which are very short, um, that often is that can impact whether we do the audio because the model that people buy audio from at the moment, for example, on Audible, you get a credit. You get a credit to use, and most people might just listen to one book a month using their credit. Are they going to spend their $16 credit on a 9 hour book, or are they going to spend it on a 30-minute children's book? They're going to choose the 9 hour their buck. So we usually so if we get the opportunity, like Little Lunch, which was such an iconic, series, and we did all 8 books as one collection, and that one was just a straight narrative, one narrator doing all the voices, and it's done incredibly well for us. On the flip side, we did another one, which is the Animal Bab Sharky and the Animal Mummies series, and that had music and sound effects and two narrators, and that was sort of more of a production. But that's because that series is quite wacky, and the authors already had music that they'd done for the book, so it just made complete sense. So again, it's very much title case by case view, and it just tends to be top tier, um, middle grade, just because they tend to be longer. And then there's the YA, which is that's hard to make work, but the YA crossover. So YA, but with a crossover into adults. Those tend to do quite well.
Very good, very good. I'm afraid that is all we have time for. We've come to the end. I want to thank you so much, Chiara, for taking part in it. Thank you everyone for being here today with us. And again, thank you to Chiara for spending the time. And thank you to the wonderful people from Writing New South Wales who have been working in the background, putting in hints into the chat and links, and also helping me out with the audience questions. If we didn't get time to get to your question, I do apologize, but sometimes that's just where there's too many for us to work with. If you're not already subscribed to Newsbite, which is our weekly newsletter, that will let you know when events such as this are taking place, as well as a whole host of other services that we do produce. Our next first Friday in August, on the first Friday of August, will be with Leslie Williams, who is from Major Street Publishing. And for all those people who've been asking about nonfiction in today's talk, that is going to be important because she is a very important independent publisher of nonfiction in this country. So we're going to be exploring the world of nonfiction with her. Thank you again for being here. Thank you to Chiara for I've really enjoyed speaking to you, and we'll say goodbye to you, and we'll see you all in the next first Friday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.